And he said, yeah. He says, how long is it? He said, this long. That's a fisherman response. But it's what Peter and James and John, well, John wrote this, and he said, we caught 153 brigands. And then Jesus invites them to breakfast. He said, bring some of your fish. Come on for breakfast. And then he goes through this thing with Peter and the rest of the disciples to remind them that it's not over. To remind them that it's time to get back to work. They thought they went back to work. Jesus said, no, you need to go back to work on the important things that I've given you to do. When I called you to myself, when I said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, that wasn't a part-time job. That wasn't summer employment. That was the rest of your life. And as you think about it, you realize that just because I died, that's not the end of it. That's just the beginning of it. Because I rose from the dead, and now you have the power to go and do what I've given you to do. He asked Jesus a question 3 times, do you love me? Giving him the opportunity to respond 3 times as he denied him 3 times. To respond 3 times that he did love him. But I want you to notice Jesus' instructions to Peter as we go down through here. As he responds, yes, I love you. He says, tend my sheep. Then feed my sheep. Then follow me. Back to work. As I was working through this, I came to the time in my deliberations, as I always do, of how does this apply to me? How does this apply to our church? And it seemed pretty obvious. It seemed pretty obvious that there's stuff for us to do. And we can't just slack off. Makes me think of an old farmer who was a good farmer, and he had guests one day, and he was showing them around the farm, and they said, boy, everything's run so great here. Everything's perfect. You got such good shape. This farm probably run itself. And he said, absolutely. Right downhill. And you see, that's the way anything is, but that's also the way a church is. We just had our meeting with the district superintendent. And as we went through all the things that this little church does. And she goes, you know, this is amazing, all that you do for such a little church. That thought came to mind again. This church is in such good shape, it could run itself. Yes, right downhill. And the Lord has begun to stir in me that we need to do some stuff. It's easy to get comfortable. Everything's going well. My daughter Heather, a while ago, taught me a word that applies to this situation, and that word is intentional. She's really into intentional. She's really into not floating, not drifting, but being intentional. And as I think about our church, the thing that it struck me is that we need to get back to being intentional. God's given us something to do. And it wasn't until we don't feel like it anymore. It wasn't until Nate retires. Shh, don't say it like that. It's God has given us something to do all along, right now. And so, there's an announcement in the bulletin that says, Church Future Committee meeting May 19th. Where we're going to get together, the church leadership and other people who might be interested, and talk about the future of our church. And talk about being intentional about the future of our church. And it gets back to this passage here. Peter and James and John thought they were going back to work in what they always knew as a fisherman. But Jesus comes to the lakeside again, takes them back to their initial meeting, and then he brings them to the present, and he says, if you want to go back to work, you need to go back to working within the job that I have given you to do. The verse that we looked at in the word from Jesus, go into all the world and preach the gospel. The Great Commission, go make disciples of all nations, and lo, I am with you always. You want excitement, there's some excitement. You want something to do with purpose, there's some stuff to do with purpose. And we're going to, over the next few months, go back to being intentional about what we're supposed to be doing as a church. And I announced it this morning because it's my fault. You see, we've been following Nate, and he said everything's going fine. But the Lord's been dealing with Nate, and so we need to make some changes. We need to start being intentional again about what we're doing as a church. And this passage says this to me and says this to us. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for helping your disciples stay on track. When they thought it was over, when they went back to work, Jesus came to them and called them back to the work that he had called them to. Thank you for the reminder for us, for me, in this passage. And we look to you for your working in us, in me, as we go from here. And what you're trying to do in our little church and through this little church. Work in our hearts as you draw us to yourself. In Jesus' name, amen.